can we also just start this by saying that right before Dan hit record, Justin goes, Nick, don't be fancy, let's just make those noises.
Let's just do this.
Welcome to Point of View. All right. We love making noises. Justin, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? I've been sick, but I feel better now. And allergies suck. So just say that. How are you?
Yeah. I'm good. Do you want to answer that question with your anecdote from the week, as we usually do?
My anecdote from the week? Well,
Yeah.
I feel like
What have you been up to?
I don't know if your anecdote is the same as mine, but last
might
week
be.
we did a little bit of travel. As we said in previous episode, we were at Loyola. Well, after that, we traveled back to Boston, and that was a fun time, wasn't it?
No. I yes, it was. I actually had a good like the memory is fun, but I didn't go to work the next day because we got home at 4 a.m.
Right.
I also think I joined the mile marker of walking the airport because I was looking for a drink, and they were like, "Yeah, there's a vending machine, at the other end of the airport, basically." And I got there, realized the drinks were horrible, came back, got back to you, and was like, "Oh, I was thirsty." So, and then I walked back and got
Basically, our flight was supposed to be at 10:55 p.m. We'd be getting into Boston around midnight. It got delayed until about 1 o'clock in the morning, and then we boarded about 12:30, sat in the tarmac until about 2:07, and then took off and got to our houses around 4 a.m. We landed probably like 3:30. I don't even know. Probably
Yes,
3.
and the worst part about it is I'm notorious for falling asleep before we get off the ground. So we get on the plane at 12:30. I text my parents, "All right, I'll be there like in an hour and a half to an hour." And I fall asleep. And then I wake up on the ground and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I slept through the whole flight. That's great." And then I looked at Justin and he was like, "We're still in Maryland." And I was like, "I'm going to kill somebody," but I didn't say that because I wanted to stay on the plane.
Yeah, that's
but
probably better. It's good.
Yeah. So that was horrible. We didn't get until 4, and then I didn't go to work the next day because I was a tired boy.
I was going to be very shocked if you did go to work, because you usually get up around 6 to go to work, don't you?
6:55 is when my first of like 25 alarms go off.
Okay. All right. So you would have gotten
Goes off.
3 hours of sleep.
Yeah. Do you have anything that and I did wake up at 7 because I was not about to text my supervisor at 4 a.m. and be like, "Yo, I'm not coming in."
Yeah.
So I did that at 7 o'clock instead.
Sure.
Yes. What are you grateful for this week?
What am I grateful for? Well, I am grateful for, and this is going to sound super strange, but my allergies, as I've mentioned, have been very bad. I have terrible spring allergies, and I don't know. You can kind of hear
There
them.
they are.
They're congested. There they are. Yeah. Hi. How are you? But I am grateful for the warm weather, and as well as the allergy medication that I can take to help me survive the warm weather, or at least
Live.
this warm weather. But
Live from Justin's nose. It's his allergies.
it's my allergies. Allergies are also, let me just, small little not an anecdote, I guess, small little tangent. Allergies are just so like stupid. It's just something that your body decides, hey, you can't be near this or it will kill you. Like, it's just, like.
Speaking of stupid,
It's just
let's
really-
talk about a bill. I'm kidding. What a lovely
Wow,
segue.
what a terrible segue for me to say, oh, they'll kill you, and then you can say, let's talk about a bill.
No, I was stupid. I said, speaking of stupid, let's talk about a bill. But no, I agree. I hate allergies. I also have them.
Do you have spring allergies?
Yes, and it's not fun, nor is it fresh. And now that we have COVID, every time I sneeze, I'm like,
Yeah.
this is the end.
Well, that's the thing too. Is earlier this week I tested myself because I was like I might have COVID because I'm coughing and sore throat and all this
Yeah.
stuff, but it was just super severe allergies to trees. You know.
Yeah, I also tested myself because I got a no, seriously, I don't even know if I told you this yet, but I got a text or not a text, an Apple notification saying that I was exposed to someone with COVID
Oh.
for more than 15 minutes either on the 29th or the 30th of March. So it's been a little bit now. And I got this the week after. So I tested and I followed all the instructions and I tested negative. I didn't have any symptoms, but it was interesting that my phone just told me. Because you can set that up on iOS.
You can set that up on Android too.
I'm sure. I mean, it's a good thing that we have
But
that.
you know, as an operating system now.
I do know that's an operating system. See episode 10 to learn for yourself. But yeah, I would say I'm grateful for. What am I grateful for? I've said self-care, but I'm gonna say it again. Yeah, I'm just gonna say that.
Sure.
I haven't really thought about it, but I love self-care and I love hopefulness. I'm gonna say also grateful for hope for the future. And grateful for you, or grateful to you, I guess, for having this conversation today because I think it's a really important one.
Nick and I wanted to have a discussion on the bill in Florida known as HB 1557, Parental Rights in Education. You may have heard it referred to by its critics as the Don't Say Gay bill that's come out of Florida.
That's what I call it, and to be honest, I couldn't remember the letter number name, the official name, so that's why I was like, Justin, do you want to take this one? Yes.
And so basically what this bill had a couple of parts, and we're going to dissect it a little bit and kind of share our own opinions on it. But one of the parts specifically says, and this is coming from the bill itself, classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. And this is the sentence or the lines part of the bill that have kind of named it the Don't Say Gay bill, because essentially it is saying, well, any conversation in schools about sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3, or, this is also important, in a manner that is not deemed age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards, whatever that means. So we wanted to talk about the implications of this bill. I myself identify as a straight cisgender male, but am an ally to the LGBTQ community. I just want to name that right off the bat because I think that's important to ground this conversation in who
Of course. And like I've grown up with a lot of friends in the LGBTQ plus community. Looking up to Lady Gaga and growing up with her music, she's very outspoken and very much an ally. But yeah, I know a lot of people in the LGBTQ community. I'm surrounded by them, and you can probably guess why. And it's because I'm wildly popular. No, I'm kidding. But I make with that what you will. I just want to first, because Justin, you and I had a conversation about the definition of sexual orientation versus sexuality. And I think a lot of people, when they say sexual orientation can't be taught in the classroom to kids kindergarten through third grade, I think that they're kind of confusing the definition of sexual orientation with sexuality, right? So sexual orientation is really just who, in my opinion, who you're attracted to, right? And like, I don't know about you, but I've known about sexual orientation. Maybe I didn't use those words when I was a kid, but I've known about that since I knew that my parents were together, right? Like, that's just, I don't know how you learned about sex, or not sex, but sexual orientation, but it's just kind of something that we know, but I wasn't going around at 5 and being like, so the sexual orientation of my parents are, right?
Yeah, it's kind of been like on the peripherals of our minds.
Exactly.
Kind of since we've been born, right? Since we've been old enough to kind of understand that my mom loves my dad and people around me love each other. And, I feel like the idea of sexual orientation has been around. Obviously we haven't talked about it in formal ways
Right.
when we were younger, but the
Of
idea has been
course.
around for our entire lives.
Of course. And I think that, I mean, I'll get into this later, but we talk about how it's kind of been like on the peripheral. Straight has been the default in conversation, right? So it's not really talked about because we don't really have to talk about it because, a lot of people just assume, oh, straight is just the normal, which is not actually the case. And I also want to point out that different sexualities and different gender identities have been around since straight people have been around. Honestly, they're just getting more representation right now. So let's just start the conversation there.
And let's just define it. Like,
Yeah,
so
definitely.
the American Psychological Association defines sexual orientation, and this is sexual orientation with a big O, as a component of identity that includes a person's sexual and emotional attraction to another person and the behavior that may result from this attraction. An individual's sexual orientation may be lesbian, gay, heterosexual, bisexual, queer, pansexual, or asexual. A person may be attracted to men, women, both, neither, genderqueer, androgynous, or have other gender identities. Sexual orientation is distinct from sex, gender identity, gender role, and gender expression. And so that's kind of the definition, right, Nick, that we're going to use for sexual orientation as we continue this conversation in this episode.
Yes, and we talked about sexual attraction being one of the categories that might fall under a discussion of sexual orientation, right? But, talking to kids, that is not what teachers will be or are explaining to. That's not how you explain sexual orientation to children, right? I don't know how you learned about sex, but I learned the only way appropriate, and that was from a 5th grader who hadn't seen the video yet, but was seeing it next week and thought he knew everything on the bus. No, I'm serious though, but
right. I think what you're getting at is you're saying that if parents are having these types of conversations with kids about sexual orientation, you're not necessarily using the word sexual orientation. You're not necessarily using,
right.
you're using terms like, oh, they like this type of person, or
right. They love that type of person. It's very
talking
simplified.
about the concept without using the terminology.
Right. And the criticism that is predatory, or teaching kids about sexual orientation and gender identity as predatory, is problematic in and of itself. And we are really going to dive deep into that. But I just want to pose like a situation that Justin and I had talked about earlier. But kindergarten through 3rd grade, which is what the bill is aimed at, that it concerns itself with that age group.
Or at least it talks about explicit.
Yes. Okay. If you're a straight parent, right, and you're married, and you think, and the reason I'll say married is just because I'm going to say mommy and daddy later, so just, that's why I threw married in there. But if you're straight and you're married, and you think that teaching kids about the existence of gay people is corrupting their innocence, just think, honestly, kind of like I said before, I would invite you to reflect on how you explained mommy and daddy's love for each other to your kids. And if that was the way you think gay people are doing it, I would suggest turning yourself in, because apparently sexuality has to be taught on a XXX rated level by your definition. And that's just not the case, right? A lot of the criticism that it's predatory, I kind of invite you to think about how you see gay people, because there's a simple way to explain sexual orientation to both children and adults, really. It's that two people, I'll say, love each other just for the topic, or just in the case of talking to kids. The people that are saying that it's predatory or that it's corrupting kids, I think they're more concerned about changing the status quo, which is in favor of them, right? Is in favor of straight being the norm.
I want to talk about the law, right? From kind of like on both sides here, right? So
yeah,
let's talk about what supporters are saying about it. Supporters say that the law allows parents to control when, if, and what their children learn about LGBTQ topics up until at least 4th grade, right? Although that can kind of get iffy because, again, the language says through 3rd grade, or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. That could be changed, right? So if someone says, oh, up until 7th grade is not appropriate, then, that could be taken out of schools. It also says, supporters also say that kids may be too young to be exposed to these types of conversations, which it's interesting because when you have conversations about race or disability or other types of conversations that are deemed heavier conversations, that argument gets thrown into there too, right? Kids are too young to let kids be kids, that these kids are too young to have these conversations, all that stuff. Critics, on the other hand, say that this law actively oppresses conversations about LGBTQ topics, denies the existence of LGBTQ community members in their identity, history, and culture, threatens to disenfranchise the experience of LGBTQ members, and could potentially worsen already high health and suicide risks for the LGBTQ community. So
Yes.
those are kind of the two perspectives of where supporters of the law are coming from and where critics of the law are coming from.
Well, thank you for bringing up the law, because I have. So you're right, and they don't. Not you're right, because you didn't say this, but it doesn't explicitly say gay in the bill, or that it's aimed at people who don't identify as straight or cisgender. However, by eliminating those conversations, straight, cisgender in our culture, not in our culture, but in the media, just in terms of, general conversations, has become the norm. When it's not really, it's just that's what it is like in conversation with many in America for many people, right? That's the one that is represented, while the others are underrepresented. So I don't know. That goes back to is it really an issue with talking about sexual orientation? Because it's talked about anyways, just in terms of being straight, right? Or is it more about changing or a fear of changing the power dynamic that kind of favors you? And by you, I mean a straight person. I'm not talking about Justin when I say you. I'm just speaking to people who are opposing the bill.
Right. It invalidates someone's experience who may be questioning their sexual orientation or may be questioning their gender identity. And as a more concrete example, it invalidates, say a student is in the Florida school system, say kindergarten to third grade, and they have parents that are gay.
Mm-hmm.
They're not allowed to tell or say anything to their teachers or say anything to their peers or anyone within the school system about, like my dad's or my mom's.
Right.
That's imagine being in that situation and feeling ostracized in that case, but then also if you are someone who is questioning their sexual orientation or someone who knows that their sexual orientation is not straight or their gender identity is either non-binary or not with their doesn't agree with the sex that they were assigned at birth, imagine the ostracization you might feel if you're not allowed to talk about that at all, right? So that's kind of what we're getting at, is just this law, although there are supporters of it and there are things in it that can be seen as giving parents more control over their children's education. What I see it doing more so is causing harm to specific populations of people in the Florida school system.
Which I'm assuming you mean gay, queer, gender.
Yeah, members of the LGBTQ community, as well as those who have loved ones who are in the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up, the example of a kid, a little boy or a little girl, or any child that doesn't identify as a boy or a girl. Say they have gay parents, right? Imagine not only the ostracization that you were talking about, if that's even a word. I don't know.
Ostracization.
Yes, thank you. But also the confusion. Think about when you're 5 years old. You look up to your parents and see absolutely, for the most part, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I know when I was a kid, I looked up to my parents as just like, they could not do it. They were always right. They could not do any wrong. And that wasn't because they were teaching me that. It's just like, they're your caretaker. They're adults, so they know what they're doing, right? Like, and you love them. Imagine hearing that your parents are wrong or inappropriate or sinful in some way at school, just the confusion and the hurt that might cause. Because, like I said before, you don't know. First of all, these adults are talking about it in terms of like a sexual way, right? That it's like perverted or something. But you're a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old or whatever, kindergarten through third grade, that you don't think about it in a sexual way. You're just like, oh, they both love each other, and they love me. How is that wrong? How are they doing something wrong? Like, just the confusion and hurt that causes, and also the idea that a teacher can out or should out a student who comes out to them as part of the LGBTQ community. Is that really, like, is this bill really for to protect kids, or is it to protect you?
Explain what you mean, because we haven't talked about the part of the bill
Yeah,
that requires parents to be notified.
yeah. So the bill requires, basically, like you just said, if I'm a teacher and a student comes up to me and says, "Hey, I'm gay," I would be required to report that to their parents, which, just, I don't know. I would invite you to think about two things. First of all, why are they telling you and not the parent, right? Either, I mean, they might have already told the parent, but either they're uncomfortable telling the parent, and that could be because, generation wise, I would say that our generation is the best when it comes to accepting LGBTQ plus people, but we have a long way to go. But, historically, generations have been getting better at it, right? So there might be a reason that they're afraid to tell their parents. They might not feel that it's safe to tell their parents. Or, hear me out, they might just trust you as a teacher, right? They trust and feel supported enough by you that they're going to tell you. To tell their parents is completely shattering that trust. And honestly, like, might even be, I don't want to go too far with this, but what are they going to think of adults that they trust moving forward? Obviously, if the kid is in danger, like, that's different. If somebody were to tell you something and they're in danger and you have to report it to the appropriate authorities, but that's what I would hope that a teacher would do, to get them help, right? To get them the help that they need if they are in danger. But telling a child's parents, especially if they say, "Oh, well, like, my parents aren't accepting of it," that can put them even more danger, which is why I don't believe that this bill is for the protection of children. I think it's for the protection of the status quo, as I said before, which supports that straight people are the norm and people who don't not identify as straight or don't identify as cisgender are the other, or are different, or they're weird.
That's what's tricky about this law, too, is because there is a section of the law that says schools would be required to notify parents when children receive mental, emotional, or physical health services unless educators believe there is a risk of abuse, abandonment, or neglect. So it does protect against abuse, abandonment, or neglect. Where I find, and again, I'm not a lawyer, where I find issue with that is it's very vague, right? So it leaves it up to the educator or the school personnel to determine if there is a risk of abuse, abandonment, or neglect, and therefore then they would not have to report to the parent. But if there is no reason to believe that there would be any abuse, abandonment, or neglect, then it could be perpetuating any said abuse, abandonment, or neglect. If it is being reported to parents. Something else that I wanted to bring up too is that, according to the Trevor Project, which is a nonprofit organization that works towards spreading awareness about the prevention of LGBTQ suicide risk, kids who are surrounded by safe spaces that affirm what they are experiencing, their gender identity and or their sexual orientation, they are less likely to attempt self-harm or suicide. And let's just break that down a little bit. If I am someone who's experiencing something, say it doesn't have to be like I'm questioning my sexual orientation, it doesn't have to be my gender identity. Say I'm experiencing something, anything, an emotional experience. And I'm going to a trusted source, maybe that's a teacher, maybe that's another adult mentor, maybe a peer, maybe it could be a parent. And what do you think would be better for me if I am going to trust and disclose how I'm feeling in terms of my emotions about what I'm experiencing? Again, this is just a very general example. Do you think I would be better for me to be in a space where I feel heard, where I feel welcome, where I am welcomed as I am and accepted as I am, and am getting, being consoled and just listened to, in that way and affirmed of how I'm feeling, or in a place where I can be heard, but depending on what I say, someone who maybe I don't necessarily trust or I don't necessarily want to be involved in, I don't necessarily want to share something with another person, has to get involved because of a rule like this. I'm not sure if that really makes sense, but essentially what I'm saying is, if I'm experiencing something, right, and it's kind of having a heavy toll on me, and I'm going to enter a space and going to be vulnerable, right, and share what I'm feeling, I feel like I want to be in a space where I'm going to be comfortable, going to be heard, can be trusted, and some degree, even though as a kid I don't really necessarily know what the term confidentiality means, know that what I'm going to be said, what I'm going to share, what is going to be said will be kept private versus bringing other people in that I don't want to be. That was really wordy.
No, but I have something to piggyback off it. I think that creating this space where that is okay to say, right, is teaching kids, and it's not just teaching, or it's not just protecting kids who are queer or will learn later in life that they are. It's also it's forming allies, right? Because as I mentioned before, we tend to fear what we don't understand, right? And shy away from it. But if kids are taught this from a younger age, like, this is the thing, to people that are against gay people or homophobic or whatever, gay people aren't going to go away, and they're not going to change. So that is like, you're either on the bus and you accept it, and by bus I just mean like on the train. You're either on the, like, you know, you're either with the times or you're not, but the times are not going to change for you, okay? Acclimating your children to the way the world is going, which is a kinder place, is also going to help them, right? I think creating allies now, like, that is the way to create safer spaces for both queer people, or queer kids, and straight kids, or just kids in general. Let's just call them kids, because like I don't want to necessarily just be like labeling kids, right? Like, it's just, it creates a safer space, and it creates a kinder space, because kids are going to inherit the world. Like, that is just a fact of life. We are going to eventually get older and pass away, and it's going to be their job then to educate their own children, right? To keep this world around as long as we can, which we're also not doing a very good job of right now, by the way. But
well, I like the point that you made, where let's have these types of conversations at an earlier age. What's the harm, right? And there are arguments from people who say, no, kids should let kids be kids. They shouldn't be having these types of serious conversations. Well, let's back that up by science, right?
Mm-hmm.
A Yale research study showed that kids as early as the age of 3 are already forming judgments about people
Mm-hmm.
around them in terms of preferred playmates, and what those playmates look like, how they act, things like that. So if you think that it's too early for kids to have these types of conversations, okay, maybe these types of conversations, the terminology, it might be a little bit mature for children, but the fact is, the human brain starts having these types of starts observing, not even thoughts, just observing the world around them, like, right off the bat, right? That's how we survive, right? We have attachment to our mothers, to our fathers. We have we cry when we're hungry, when we're tired, when we have a poopy diaper, right? That's just how we survive, right? And so if you think, okay, these conversations are too mature for a young child, well, okay, maybe the language that we're using, sexual orientation, gay, straight, lesbian, queer, whatever, those words might be too sophisticated for a child, but the ideas are very much in play within a child's brain, within the world around that a child lives. And you can try and you can shelter a child if that's what you decide to do, and you can
That's harmful.
You can pretend that yes, I'm not encouraging it. I'm saying
I know,
be something that can happen.
Right, absolutely. No, but
the real world that we live in does not include members of the LGBTQ community, But the truth is, it does. And so are we going to have conversations and talk about ideas of acceptance from an early age, or are we going to ignore and avoid those types of conversations because even though kids are already thinking about it, whether they like it or not,
Right.
because
So
they should be kids.
yes. So with that being said, I feel like it's a parent's job to guide children in the right direction, to nurture, right? And I think that a
Sure.
huge act of allyship would be to have those conversations with your kids, but in a positive way, right? I'm not saying do not don't water those, judgments, right? Just explain to kids in the same way that you would want your existence to be explained to a child, right? If you're different in some way, and I don't want to necessarily use that word different, but we're all different in some way. So in the same way that you would want your existence to be explained, um that's just like that's just peace, really, right? Like, it's not that difficult. And to be honest, I meant just going back to using sophisticated words and understanding sexual orientation. I say this, partially as a joke, but it's also true. Like, I don't need to know, like, about sexual preferences in order to like your specific sexual preferences in order to understand your love for someone else, right? Like, as an adult, and I said this to you before the episode, like, it's not like at a straight wedding or whatever. It's not like, oh, you may now kiss the bride, and also, what are you guys into? Like, right? Like, it's just like, I don't need to know. And kids don't.
What do you
like
mean?
if I
I think you have to explain more. What do you mean
sexually,
into?
like, what are
Okay.
you into, like, for fun? Um, we don't. That's not like what we talk about when we're talking about sexual orientation, right? I'm not like, oh, you're straight. Well, what do you do for? Although I will say, a lot of straight people ask that question inappropriately. Oh, you're gay. Well, who are you, a top or a bottom? Which is like, whatever. That's interesting because I've never asked somebody who's straight, like, oh, what do you guys like to do in the bedroom? But that's just, I'm going off on another tangent. But that, we don't need that part of the conversation to talk about sexual orientation, right?
Basically, you're separating the conversation about sexual orientation and gender identity from uh, sexuality as defined as your sexual preferences and turn-ons, not
Right.
necessarily who you're attracted to, but more so
What?
turn-ons, kinks, other things like that does not need to be a part of that conversation because they're separate conversations, is what you're saying.
Yes. And speaking of kinks, stream Kinky by Kesha because it's just a phenomenal song. And our two guests from episode 14, Elizabeth and Rachel, would agree. It's one of our favorite songs. What a pop banger. I also just want to point out, too, that a lot of the criticism involving, oh, well, there are some people that want to teach kids about, like, sex young. That's not what this bill is about, or that's not what the opposers of this bill are saying at all. That's not what they're saying. It's a straw man argument, right? To be like, oh, but there are some kids. Well, yeah, you know what? And there are some straight people that want to do that too. And we don't call them gay or straight or teachers. We call them predators, right? And that's not what the people opposing this bill, the vast, 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 vast majority of these people are trying to protect children by opposing this bill. And honestly, protect adult and queer families. There's a family I follow. They're two dads with two twin boys, and they had Parents' Day at their school, and the kids are, I think, like 7. And the parents were nervous because felt like they were going to be on display, basically, in front of all of these kids. Like, what are they going to think? Moreover, what are my kids going to get questioned on? Like, are their friends going to say, or their classmates? And they said that no comments other than from the kids saying, oh, wow, I wish I had two dads. And again, that's not in a, oh, I now I'm gay, or now I want to be gay, or now I want gay parents. It's just from a 7-year-old point, it's, oh, I love my dad. I wish there were two of him. Not, I don't want a mom.
Right. Right. It's on you. Honestly, that's an interesting point that I think I tried to bring up a little bit earlier, but I don't know how well I explained it. Of basically saying, right, if say one of the arguments for this bill is, quote unquote, to protect children from the knowledge or just the exposure to whatever have you, and this is not something that I believe, but like, to the existence of LGBTQ people in the world, right? So if a child has a mother and a father, they don't have to all of a sudden be bombarded, quote unquote, being bombarded by the thought of, oh, what if like there's people out there who have two fathers or two mothers? Considered, quote unquote, protecting them from, I don't know, the existence of LGBTQ community.
Right, it's not protecting, it's sheltering.
The other side of it is, what if a child has two fathers or two mothers, and then they're being told, oh, that's not normal to have. The normal thing is to have a father and a mother. Then they're being disenfranchised, and so you're harming the child of a homosexual couple because you're saying that their experience is not normal or weird or wrong. Whatever adjective, or wrong, or whatever adjective you want to put there.
Yeah, I agree. I also just want to talk, because you mentioned, protecting them from, and that's not your belief, I know. The other side of the argument is protecting kids from, I guess, the existence of LGBTQ people, and making that synonymous with protecting them from the idea of sexual orientation. Kids are exposed to sexual orientation, and this is, first, I just want to say, this is not an argument that I came up with on my own. This is a very well-known argument, but they're exposed to sexual orientation not just from the moment that they have parents, right, but also just in children's shows, right? I grew up watching, Full House is a family show, right? And that's not even a cartoon, but Full House is a family show. I grew up knowing that Aunt Becky and Uncle Jesse loved each other, right? I grew up I didn't personally grow up watching them, but I watched Princess Belle, dance with a beast. I watched two ogres, right? A princess kiss an ogre and turn into one, which is what I think. I swear that's what I think. Like, people who are afraid of gay people happen. Like, they're just gonna turn, right?
Well,
they're gonna see
Fiona was already an ogre. To be fair,
true, she was cursed.
Yes,
but I think that's what opponents of LGBTQ families think. I think that they think they're gonna see a gay person and just turn gay. But no, there are so many different examples. I guess the dogs in The Lady and the Tramp. I haven't seen that movie. I'm really exposing myself for not knowing a lot of Disney movies.
No, but I think you're bringing up a really interesting point of people oftentimes when they talk about the quote unquote effect the LGBTQ movement could be having on the country, whatever. The fact they're talking about the external effects, let's say, right? Like, oh, if I see a gay person, I'm gonna become gay. The fact is, a lot of the dialogue within, at least from what I've heard from my friends who are part of the LGBTQ community, as well as
I've heard of them.
Some research that I've looked into, some studies that I've read, not research I've done personally, but studies that I've read. A lot of the dialogue's internal, right? If I'm questioning my sexual orientation, I'm not thinking necessarily about the influences that have caused me to think about my sexual orientation. I'm thinking about, I feel like I'm attracted to members of the same sex. I have to think about that internally. It's not because, oh, my friend over there is attracted to members of the same sex, so therefore maybe I want to be cool and I want to do that. It's not. It could be for some people that could be like a catalyst, but from a lot of what I've read and from what I've heard about and what I've heard people who have come out as gay talk to me about certain things, it's more of an internal process of self-discovery.
Right.
More so than being influenced by the media or by people in your surroundings and saying, "Oh, like maybe this is who I am because this is the people who I'm surrounded with." It's less so that case.
The only influence, in my opinion, going on is that these surrounding people are saying it's okay.
It's
if
okay.
You feel that way.
Absolutely.
And they're affirming it. I was a karate instructor for kids for about 6 years, I think, 5 years. and so it ranged from like 4-year-olds to 14-year-olds, and obviously the 4-year-olds weren't doing like karate per se, but they were just learning to really move their bodies, right? Like that's a one of them I remember uh said, "This is my girlfriend," sitting next to him. And everyone thought it was cute. So just I guess I don't even think that needs an explanation. I would just kind of put that out there to reflect on, honestly. Because had the situation, without, opening up this conversation too much, because I really just want it to be a reflective thing, for listeners, if that were a boy sitting next to him, what would that have been? What would the reception have been? What would have made the situation different in terms of like it no longer being cute?
I think that was important to say because I felt like the example came out of nowhere at one point, and then I was like, okay,
right, yeah, no,
I perfectly,
yeah.
I think we should figure out a way to summarize everything we just said.
Yes. Basically, my bottom line is that people who support this bill, I believe, are just afraid the status quo is just going to flip, right? And that they're going to somehow lose rights or be, oppressed because I guess gay people are being respected and honored as human beings, and people who don't identify as cisgender are respected as human beings, right? But that's not the goal of this, and it's not what's going to happen. The goal is equality, and it hasn't happened yet, and that's why we continue to talk about it. That's my bottom line. And I really think that if you really want to protect kids, this world is changing in terms of how we view the LGBTQ community, and that isn't going to change if you're homophobic, right? It's going to make the world not as good of a place, but people are still going to continue to accept and honor LGBTQ people. I think the only kids you're hurting by supporting this bill are the kids who are queer or have queer family members or friends, and also your own kids, because you're sheltering them and you're sending them off into a world that is kinder, and you're not giving them those kind tools themselves to fit in.
Yeah, I think my bottom line is, as someone who is constantly working every single day of my life to create a world that is welcoming, that is inclusive, that I feel everyone can belong, I don't think erasing or removing a topic of conversation from schools, and it doesn't necessarily have to be part of curriculum, I guess, but like, even that could be harmful, right? Like, just, I think I've always thought that knowledge is power, and the more knowledge that you can provide your children with to go out into the world. And again, I'm not a parent either, so I have no parental experience or anything like that. But I always find that knowledge is power. And what I am worried about, like I said, as someone who really, really, really advocates for creating a world, creating spaces where everyone can feel like they belong, where they feel like they are welcome, where they feel comfortable, I think removing certain topics because of specific identities or because of specific factors of someone's identity can be harmful. And so I think creating a law where, in grades kindergarten through grade 3, or, because it's so vague and any age appropriate, developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards, I think that can be harmful. And I think it could perpetuate already high risk mental health concerns that members of the LGBT community already face. And so I think that's why I want to have this conversation. And Nick, you want to have this conversation. It's just let's just start a discussion, right? That's what every episode of this podcast is we're going to start a discussion. We're going to share kind of what we think about things, and let's have a conversation,
And I thank you for being willing to have that conversation on air.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, my goal is I want to live in a world where everyone can be seen as they are, accepted as they are, and can live a happy life. And, I honestly, we joke about this being former Loyola campus ministry interns, but there was a call and response that we used to do in formation meetings and retreat, and it was, I would say to you, Nick, I see you.
And I would say, I am here. And I am here.
And then he would say to me,
Justin, I see you.
And I would say, and I am here. And that is just a very simple call and response, a very simple act of saying, I see you, and someone responding, I am here. And that has inspired me in so many different ways, really ways that I hadn't really thought of, to just think about how we can see people who are in our lives, people who are not in our immediate lives, like people who live far away, people who are different than us. And that's what I'm trying to strive for, is to see everybody as they are, listen to their stories, and accept who they are, and encourage and help people to live happy, successful, joyous lives. So
I think that's the perfect way, Justin, to end the episode. And I would, let's just end it by saying, inviting everyone to see people.
Absolutely.
All right. My name's Nick Gervasi.
And I'm Justin Dew.
You can reach us at our email, pointofdewpodcast@gmail.com, or by sending us a voice message on our website, anchor.fm/pointofdew. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Point of Dew Podcast and Twitter at Point of Dew. If you enjoy our show, give us a rating or review in the Apple Podcast Store. That really helps us, guys. Or share us with a friend or family member. We'd really appreciate it and are truly grateful for your support. As always, we hope you have a great week. Thank you for listening, and until next time,
H.
What we did said give up. Doesn't matter to us anymore. As long as we face forward, we will not regret our day. We have believed that we could make it through. That's how we got this high, never looking back, no doubt.